Matthew's imagery really helps us remember it's not a snapshot, it's a story. It's not a moment, it's a movement.
Yeah.
And we are on a journey with our God.
Yeah.
And we're on a journey with the people of God. You're not an individual. You are an individual, but it's not individualistic. It's not you in your relationship with God.
Yeah.
You're joining the people who together are walking to the promised land.
Yeah.
Which is and on our way there, we stop off, or maybe don't even stop off, just kind of wander
through
the wilderness,
yeah.
which again is a massive shock. If you come into Christianity, most of the images we use are, I was on one side of a cliff, God was on the other side of a cliff. Jesus put the cross that enabled me and God to come together. Woohoo! We're a happy family. Or it seems like that. I was here, my sin was on top of me. Jesus removed my sin, and now I can have a relationship with God. And it's just, that's not the biblical. I mean, some of these things help illustrate particular points, but the illustration is there you are, lost in slavery. You're pulled into this people who God begins to lead through like impossible places, like a sea, or through hard. I think Moses calls the desert, the wilderness, the hard and terrible desert. You through this place. It's impossible.
It's not a great place, is it, to live?
To a promised land, and that's the illustration of faith. And on the journey, you're given a law which says, this is the way that I'm now your God. I've set you free. You will be my people. And so this is what you will do. You'll live in this kind of way. And
he forms them. God forms his people.
And the reason he does that is because if they live that way when they reach the promised land, they will live this way of existing, which Jesus calls blessed. Picking up on the Deuteronomy chapter 28, I think it is, the blessings that come from Mount Ebal and Mount, I can't remember. There's two mountains. There's two of them. And there's blessings from one mountain, curses from the other. But you're formed in the ways of God so that you can live in his land, abundant blessing. That's the purpose. That's the imagery of Matthew.
Yeah. But it doesn't work for the Israelites.
It doesn't.
So Jesus got a new way for us. He's got a new way of forming us.
He has.
There's more.
Which is by his word and by his spirit.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. So what is the word that Jesus gives us? And I think this is really so important. What are the key things that Jesus says you should do with your life? Because often we talk about Jesus as being our friend who comes and sits with us and makes us feel good when we're going through hard times. And he does that.
Which he does do.
And when he comes and forgives us when we've got things wrong. And he does that. But what Jesus says is, okay, you've just been insulted. Now, here's what you got. This is the way you should act in this moment. And we're like, would you make me feel better because I've just been insulted? And he's like, what I'm trying to get you to do is to turn the other cheek so that you can respond as I would respond. But we don't
so
think of him like that.
Inside.
We don't think of him like that, telling us go and do this.
Yeah.
We think of him coming to us and saying, come on, would you make me feel better? And so it's so important, if you're watching this, that you have that moment of revelation, and fresh moments of revelation. We say, am I actively and deliberately trying to become somebody who naturally lives every single thing Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount?
And I was saying this is amazing this week because these chapters really are the Sermon on the Mount, where he really does explain this to us and go through it and give us. I love this because when he talks like this, it's so practical. I love it when he talks in parables, but I love it when he's so practical. So should we just look at the first thing? We're trying to give three summary ideas for what Jesus says. Obviously, the best thing is to just read it himself, what he says himself. Yeah. But try and summarise. He says, if you are in the kingdom and the Spirit forms you and his word forms you, you become somebody whose desires flowing up from within them lead them into good things, not into destructive things. And he gives some case studies. So he says, anger is something that comes up from within. And what often happens is when you're angry, you then will shout at them, you idiot, or you'll want to take them. Excuse me. You'll shout at them, you idiot.
or you'll hold a grudge against them, or you'll want to take them to court, or something. You'll act like that. And instead, what he says is, when you are angry, just deal with it in your heart. You deal with that anger in a way that leads you to love. You get right with the person, or you deal with your anger. And Paul talks about this, I think it's in Ephesians, don't let the sun go down your anger. So
it's what you do with it.
You become somebody who, when you feel angry, you just straight away, you deal with that in a positive way.
Deal with it.
Which is quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not, because anger's not a sin. It's a right response for injustice. It comes up. But what do you do with it?
So quickly can lead you to sin, can't it?
What you do with it. Yeah, the actions and how you deal with it. Do you allow it to take you down a path of sin and bitterness and unforgiveness?
Because what often we can do is, when we're angry, then we think that person's not doing what I want them to do. And I then try and use my words and my actions to change what they're about doing in order to fit with how I want them to act. Isn't it? It becomes like an act of control often. And Jesus is like, don't try and control people. Don't use your anger to try and control people.
Yeah, because anger makes you feel powerful when you feel powerless.
Yeah.
So that's an act of manipulation on someone else. When you throw your anger at them, it's trying to control them.
So when you're somebody walking in the ways of Jesus, you actually begin to find yourself feeling angry, but then that anger doesn't make you think, I'm going to control that person, I need to feel powerful over that person. You begin to actually think, I want to love that person. So it's not just anger, it's also lust, adultery. It's something from deep within. You look and think, I could use that person to satisfy my sexual desires. And they don't even need to know.
Yeah.
And what Jesus basically says is that every time you do that, you're actually dishonouring that person in a profound way.
Yeah.
And I think we're waking up to this, it's bizarre what's happening in our culture.
Yeah.
Because on one level, we're now saying it's not right to look at particularly women, but I guess it also flips the other way, men, in a way that dehumanises them, that turns them into commodity. So which is really, I think that's in line with what Jesus is saying. But the other thing, we celebrate things like Love Island, or what we call now sex workers and Playboy, although that's probably going through a little bit of a soul-searching time, all the stuff that's come out on Hugh Hefner, but we create Instagram in a way that it's all about how you look. It's all about your image. It's this weird thing that's
it's about your outward image, but it's not about your inward image, because every human being carries the image of God.
So you're
to think about somebody lustfully to satisfy your desires is dishonouring not only them, but the image of God inside them.
Yeah, and it's so self-centered ultimately.
Yeah.
But it's really hard. You kind of sit in this space and think, I don't want to act like that, and how can I? And Jesus says, here's the answer. Yeah. The kingdom is the answer.
Here's ways of honourable sexuality.
Yeah.
I'm not saying sexual desire is wrong,
no,
but there's an honourable way.
So you look at your neighbour's wife, who in the Old Testament law, you weren't allowed to covet. And Jesus says, you don't just look at your neighbour's wife and think, oh, she looks all right, and try and sleep with her. Everyone knew that wasn't the right thing. I'm not sure these days we would necessarily. But in the Old Testament law...
They knew it wasn't the right thing.
Whereas now he says, but what would you do with that? And actually says, now you can look at your neighbour's wife and say, do you know what? She's a beautiful woman. And I celebrate the fact that you made her God. And I celebrate the fact that you've placed her in a marriage with this guy. Or maybe she's not married. But it was a neighbour's wife, so she has to be married. But you can celebrate the beauty in the person and honour the person without having to turn it inward into, how can I use them to satisfy myself? So what he's saying is your kingdom changes you from somebody who dehumanises others and turns them into commodities to achieve your goals, into somebody who loves others. So let's talk about Jackie Puninger. Yeah. Who's a bit of a hero of ours. Because she maybe embodies this, do you think?
Yeah.
So in Hong Kong, there was a part of China that was sort of the strip between Hong Kong, which was British ruled, and China, which was Chinese ruled. And there's this thing called the Walled City, which was this, nobody really ruled over it. And what happened was all the criminals and gangsters and people and super poor would live there. And it seemed like everyone would look at them and think, these guys are annoying. They're annoying because they're either sucking resources and stopping us from getting what we want, or they're actively coming in and destroying what we're trying to do. And so you could look at them as commodities. That's often the poor are looked at. Like, we don't want them. And she chose to go and not treat them as commodities, not treat them as people she'd use to try and build a name for herself, to try not to treat them as a commodity in any way, but just to go and love them, to love them. And so that was what she went to do. I think that's so amazing, isn't it? That's like she brought the kingdom. But
loving them was bringing the kingdom. It wasn't just a feeling, I love you or I give you things. She didn't just go to give them food, but she did, because a lot of them were drug addicts. So the Lord showed her how to care for their bodies by providing food and safety, and then provide for their emotions by praying through some of the traumas. Often they've been drug addicts because they've been through trauma as a child and through life. The Lord would deal with some of that. And then ultimately, the love for them was sharing the gospel with them, and they meet Jesus and they have that chance to come from, she would describe them literally coming from, like the Israelites, from slavery to drugs and trauma and poverty and the people using them for their own ends, to the flood, to the dove. Jesus tells them who they are, to freedom. And so that's why we feel that she epitomizes some of the Sermon on the Mount and that teaching. And just because life is so raw, and she's written a book, that's how we can hear these stories, but she would tell stories of, people then going back and forgiving those who'd, really done them wrong, done violence. Them choosing, Jesus talks about if something causes you to sin, gouge out your eye or cut off your hand. It's metaphorical. Get rid of the things that cause you to sin. Well, they needed to then choose to stop going back to the houses where they would be tempted by the drugs and stay here, or move area, do something active to then follow Jesus. And then the temptations, and then they would have gone through a wilderness time. She told many tales of people were saved and came into freedom, and they almost couldn't cope with it. And the love she had was so despairing, because they would go back to their lifestyle, or they'd run away, or they just couldn't cope with it. But many, many others who could and came through the wilderness. And so so what Jesus teaches in these passages is so real. It's so practical. It's so more than just let's just love somebody.
Yeah.
It just covers everything.
So to be salt and light, which Jesus says we are as the people of the kingdom.
Yeah.
It's not just to go and, hey, have you been saved?
Yeah.
You need to pray this prayer to get the forgiveness of your sins. Yeah. And it's not just, let's give you a little smoochie on your whatever you call it, on the top of your head, and tell you, you're wonderful as you are. It's not. It's neither of those two things. It's something.
Or give you things. We often think of loving people as giving them things. Let's give them the physical things. That they need.
Buy them a sandwich,
which they do need.
But it's something so much more radical than both of those things. It's like, stop living in darkness. Live in the day. The new day has dawned. This is how we act now. It's day. Come and live in this day.
And salt and light are so they're powerful images that he uses. Yeah. You can tell if something's salty. You can tell if it's the light and the darkness. It's such a massive distinction.
So we become people whose desires lead us to treating people exactly like Jesus would treat them. So Jackie Puninger, we're saying, whether she at times had to force herself to do it or whether she naturally did it, I'm sure it was different things on different days, but become somebody who looks at those who others regard as a waste of space and a waste of time. And she says, I've become somebody who looks at them and loves them.
And even they treated her badly sometimes. Yeah. And the love continued to forgive. and the love continued to look at the dignity behind what they were doing.
And Jesus says you can become that kind of person. You can become that kind of person that the annoying colleague or your neighbour who winds you up, or a family member who abuses you verbally and kind of shouts at you. In all of these things, you can respond to these things in exactly the way that God would. You can become that kind of person, which is an amazing thing. So we're people formed by the ways of our God. Our desires are so changed that they start to lead into good things.
And then you can also live each day without lack.
So this is really astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in this world where we think that everything depends on you. It's on you. You need to go and sort yourself out. And Jesus says over and over, like, don't worry. You have a Father in heaven. Look at the birds. Look at the flowers. He'll care for you. You can live without lack. And what he does often is he as we talked about, I think in the session last time, was he'll take you to places where you think you really need something and you realise you actually don't need it. So it's not like, oh, you've got everything you could ever wish for, but you're living without lack. You've got abundance of the things you really need that really make life right and good. An abundance of those things. And as I say this, you probably struggle to believe it, because I still find I'm like, oh, really? But this is what Jesus says is in the kingdom.
But I come back to this passage again and again. Jesus has to say to me again and again, look at the lilies of the field.
Yeah.
I clothe them. Are you not going to be clothed? Because you just kind of get into a space again when you're thinking, I haven't got the money for this, or I haven't got the resources for this, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And it comes in ways that you don't always expect. Remember a time when, I don't know if this is a good example or not, you cut this out if not. I remember a time when one of our sons said, I'd really like a double bed. And I looked at him and I said, are you kidding? Are you a prince or something? You know, we can't afford that. There's no way, you know, get back to your work. Stop asking for ridiculous things. And I think you said to him, as you generally do, well, why don't you pray for it and ask God? And he prayed, and literally the next day somebody said, I'm giving away a double bed. Would you like it? And so that's not necessarily your needs, because in my view you could just sleep on the floor on a mattress. But that's just God's generosity, and it wasn't that. I think we probably could expect, we would like to buy a double bed, but actually God provided it.
Yeah.
Actually, it was as good as new, really. Yeah. Through a different means.
Yeah.
And showed our son that actually he does care about some of the things that we ask for. And, I don't think it worked when they tried to pray for a Nintendo Switch, though.
No. Still waiting for that one.
Doesn't happen like that every time. That was just an example of the kindness of the Lord.
And another way that Jesus says in the kingdom you can live without lack is the need for approval. Now, isn't this a massive thing today? So he looks at the fact, he's talking about the Pharisees, and he's like, these guys, what they do is they do everything in public, and what they need is for people to approve them and say, oh, wow, you guys are really holy, or we respect you, and wow, you really know God. And he's like, you can live life free from that. Your Father has already approved you. He's already said you're his son, you're his daughter. And what an incredible difference it would make to our lives if we didn't go around constantly trying to win people's approval, or kind of fleeing from a sense that somebody disapproved of something that we've done. For me, that's a massive one, I think. I found it really a journey to actually really accept that if God is for me, it doesn't really matter if somebody thinks I'm an idiot or thinks that I've done the wrong thing. I shouldn't go trying to win people's approval, because what often that does is I start to then do things that I don't really think are a perfect thing for me to do in that moment, but I do it just to try and get their approval. And Jesus is like, no, live your life unto God. Do what he as your Father asks you to do, and then you're free, and you live a life that ultimately is the life that is blessed. So that's
interesting, because I think our culture teaches that, but the answer there is often look inside yourself and be true to yourself.
Yeah.
So don't worry about what other people. It's constantly. It doesn't matter what other people think. Be true to yourself. So there's something of that in the culture, but the actual answer is be true to God.
Yeah.
We shouldn't. What you're describing is not being reliant on what outwardly people think, and they may disagree.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily
true
to ourselves. It's true to God, and we know what a life of freedom and fullness looks like because we have passages like the Sermon on the Mount and the example of Jesus and his followers.
And actually, when I'm true to God, I'm most authentically me than I ever could be. And often when I've tried to be true to myself, look inside, and all I end up doing is getting a bit confused.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be true to myself. I don't even really know who I am.
Who am I?
What am I? And what am I? What's what? And
but the voice from above tells you who you are.
Yeah.
He tells you when he calls you.
And if you listen to that voice, then the dove, the Holy Spirit, helps you and shapes you. Everything in you is then aligned. There's a harmony of, I'm trying to be who you said I was born to be, who you formed me to be, and the Spirit of God is taking me and filling me up to be that person. Now that is a model of a life that is whole and blessed. And sometimes I look inside and something that I find is confused, or it will lead me to frustration. But when I say, okay, Lord, you know me, you made me, you tell me, when I live that, there's harmony inside. It's the inner.
Yeah.
Inner
riches. Freedom we were talking about last week.
Yeah.
In the last one,
So that's really cool. And then the final one is that
standing strong in the time of trial.
And isn't this just so
relevant?
And by strong we mean you remain the same in every circumstance. Wouldn't it be amazing if no matter what happens to you, you could be steadfast and remain the loving, good, truthful, kind, righteous person that you are on your best days? Wouldn't that just be... I mean, we yearn for authenticity and integrity in our culture. Wouldn't it be amazing if God could do something in you so that you could, no matter how anybody treats you or acts towards you, you could be the kind, good, true, pure, loving, generous version of yourself in every moment? Wouldn't that just be amazing? And Jesus, in one of my, I think, most favourite bits in the whole of the Bible, talks about not a wilderness, but a storm. And he says, you will build your life on something, and a storm will come. You'll get a shove. And what happens to you in that moment will depend on what your foundations are. And if you just do what your culture says, if you carry on acting however you always acted, if you don't really think about it, you will find that you cannot be that person of integrity and love and kindness and generosity and truthfulness and goodness in hard times. You can't. You'll fall apart. You'll act. You'll do things you wish you wouldn't do. You'll break down. But if you stand on the words of Jesus, you will be able to be that person in every day, no matter what happens.
But Tom, what happens if something really sad happens and I feel sad?
Yes.
What do you mean? Do you mean that I shouldn't express my sadness?
No, so I mean, it's you express sadness in a good way. You express sadness in a loving way. You express sadness in a generous way. You express sadness in a way that honours the people around you and honours your God. You may feel sexually attracted to somebody, but you express that in a way. You express that in a way that is good. You express that in a way that honours and generous and kind and truthful and righteous. And I mean, the words holiness we use, but so you still have those feelings. But those are like it's like a ticket to catch a train. So every feeling is like a ticket to catch a train, and the feeling itself is a good thing. Yeah. But what we often do is we look at the ticket and we jump on the train and we just take that to the destination that everybody else is getting off. Oh, everybody else, whenever anybody else feels sexual attraction, what they do is they get off at the stop of lust, or I'll express that through getting my own desires. I get this ticket of anger or sadness, and what everyone else does is they get off. Everyone else is getting off this platform. What's going on? And if you look at what Jesus says, he says, when you feel angry, get off at this stop. Get off at the stop of making it right. Dealing with it. When you feel sexual attraction to somebody, get off at the stop where you express that through kindness and love
Yeah.
and what might be called friendship or like kind of the loving kindness to them. Don't express it at the place where everyone, where you would have got off. Does that make sense?
So that's what you mean about being able to be the same in all...
In all circumstances, you can be that steady ship.
I think the Psalms do that quite well, don't they?
Amazing.
The expression of how you're actually feeling within the framework of being in God's presence.
Yeah. So after the Sermon on the Mount, you get 3 examples of people who then build their life on the rock rather than building their life on the sand. So the 3 people who go into basically like a kind of a wilderness type experience and they stay faithful like Jesus did rather than falling away like the Israelites did.
I'm looking excited because when we prepared this and you pointed this out to me, I don't know, it just was a really different way of reading these stories than when I read it on my own. And I found it really inspiring that we're just going to look at 3 people who react to Jesus and other people may react badly to what they're doing. So something that I think is a good thing to be doing, others may not agree with. And it was like a revelation. I thought, oh, that doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. So tell us about it, Tom.
So,
really
so what we
powerful.
see, I think Matthew does this deliberately. You see a Roman centurion, you see a paralytic, and then you see Matthew. And Jewish paralytic, it's important they're Jewish.
Yeah.
And then Matthew the tax collector, who would be difficult to categorise. But anyway, let's do the Roman centurion first. So Roman centurions, they know what their role is to stand over the people that they govern to ensure that ultimately Caesar is regarded as king and as the ultimate authority.
Yeah, because they've occupied the land.
Yeah. So that's his role. He's there to keep peace. He can be kind, he could be good, but ultimately what he's there is to make sure that the authority of Caesar is regarded as the highest authority. Now what he does is that when he has a servant who's sick, and Jesus says, all right, I'll come. He says, you don't need to come.
Yeah.
I understand what it is to be under authority. Yeah. All you need to do is say the word and this sickness will disappear. Yeah. And Jesus is amazed.
It's like incredible faith.
But the thing that's amazing is that this centurion is speaking heresy.
Yeah.
He's basically saying I acknowledge there's an authority above Caesar.
Yeah.
Because Caesar can't cure sickness.
Yeah.
Caesar can't deal with my servant. So what he actually does is he responds to Jesus in a way that's heretical to his culture.
Dangerous for him.
It's
the Romans would not have understood or tolerated or agreed with that at all.
So that's one way. The paralytic, the Jewish paralytic, he comes and his friends actually bring him and they put him before Jesus. In Matthew, I don't think you get the roof being torn apart, but Jesus heals him and says, I forgive your sins and take up your mat and walk. And so he takes up his mat and walks and he's like, I've been forgiven of my sins.
Yeah.
And what he does, when he says that, it's heresy.
It's shocking.
For a Jew, because you weren't allowed to carry your mat on Sabbath and the place you went to get forgiveness of sins was the temple.
Only God could forgive sins as well.
And the only way God did it was through the temple.
Yeah.
So if somebody outside of the temple is saying, I forgive your sins and I pick up your mat, and you do it, you're committing heresy to the person you used to be.
Yeah.
So this is who you used to be.
To the Jewish community.
And to who you were.
Yeah.
And the same with the Roman centurion. Who he was, he's now acting totally the opposite in a way that's heresy for who he used to be.
Yeah.
And then the third one is Matthew, who I'm going to say probably wasn't really Jewish any longer, maybe, even though he would have been from Jewish stock, but he'd collaborated with the Romans, probably regarded as a traitor. And really now his God was money.
Yeah.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't do that otherwise, would you?
And what does he do? He acts in a way that's heretical towards a businessman.
Yeah.
He throws away money for no purpose.
Craziness.
There's no purpose.
What are you doing? Yeah.
There's no other than he throws it away because now he wants Jesus to be his God.
Yeah.
Or maybe just I think he is saying in that moment, you are a higher authority than the money.
Yeah.
You have something beyond. So what they do is they act in a heretical manner to who they used to be.
Yeah.
And what that illustrates is when the day comes and it's dawning, you act in a way that's heretical, totally different. It wouldn't be acceptable in the darkness. And so the question for you is, in what ways are you committing heresy for how you used to be?